All right, very good. Welcome everyone to Spring into Summer. Spring into your summer garden with confidence. All righty. So just a few housekeeping pieces of information. These webinars are being recorded, and you can see a website here where the recording can be found, but we will send you an email from Zoom within a couple of days after the recording so that you can have it and you can download it and so forth. As you've noticed, your cameras are off and also microphones. I would just like to say a bit of word about technology. Things do happen, as we know, in this virtual webinar stage that we're in right now. If something happens, though, we just ask that you'll please be patient with us, because we will then go to our backup plan A, B, or C, whatever might be needed. So thank you for your patience with that. Please enter your questions into the chat, as we just did at the very beginning. Someone who is answering a poll entered some information in for us. So please do that, and we will answer your questions at the end of this presentation. I would like to turn this over to our host, Karen Wilhelm, with the California American Water.
Well, thank you, Cheryl. Welcome, everybody across the state. We have multiple water districts with California American Water attending today. So we'd like to welcome our Monterey, Los Angeles, Ventura, San Diego, Larkfield, and others that are branched out and connected to our service areas. For customers in our service areas, we have some great programs available to you. Each staff member in these districts are available to discuss them in detail. And you can find the phone number here for each of those. If it's you don't have a pen and paper, like Cheryl had mentioned, there will be a recording. And then I can also put it in the chat so that you'll have at least one of our numbers to contact. We do have residential programming, WaterWise and WaterSense low flow devices, watering outdoor schedules, and again, lots more. And you can always find that information either through the CaliforniaAmericanWater.com website or by calling one of our professional staff members, conservation staff, at the number listed below. Again, thank you and welcome to a great webinar. I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to get going. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Karen. All right, Marcia.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I want to introduce my friend, landscape designer and arborist extraordinaire, Marcia Scott of Marcia Scott Landscape Design. Take it away, Marcia.
Thanks, Sule. Today with me is Cheryl Buckwalter of Landscape Liaisons. She's our facilitator today. And of course, Sule Tranquilli of Tranquil Gardens, who will help me present Spring into Summer. Sule, let's get started.
Right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. Today, we are going to cover how to prepare your garden for our hot, dry summers. I'm going to give you 2 new watering habits. Marcia is going to talk about where to start with new efficient irrigation. She's going to also give you some tips on converting your old irrigation into a brand new water-saving style. And she's making it easy for everyone. It's a can-do moment. She's also going to talk about that magical, mystical question, when do I run my irrigation and how long do I run it? And at the very end of the presentation, I'm going to give you a couple of other smooth moves that you can make now to help your garden thrive through the heat. And a little hint, that's going to be about soil. All right, let's get started. So, are you ready for summer? We know that water is a very limited resource in the Sacramento region, and honestly, guys, that trend is really not going to change anytime soon. So now is a great time to start thinking about conservation and to make those moves now so you can summer-proof your yard, no matter where you live. Let's get going. So next, I have 2 new habits for you in watering your landscape. These are really easy. They're pretty simple. There's just a couple of things to know and to think about. And you don't have to do a big expensive renovation, all right? Number one, get your water to the root systems. That's just enough water, and that's exactly where we need it. Number two, water deeply and less frequently, all right? So these are 2 new habits that you can cultivate. So when we talk about watering to our root depth, that's where we're avoiding runoff. You really only need to water to where the plant roots are alive, where they're dwelling. So any more water past that is actually wasted and it becomes irrigation runoff, okay? So the 2 chronic problems that we see with overwatering is drowned plants, literally, and irrigation runoff. Let's take a look at the soil. So here's your soil. This is what it looks like ideally after being watered just the right amount. If you take a look at those white spots, those are air spaces or air pores. They're air pockets that are necessary for plant and soil life. All right, they're naturally there. It depends on what kind of soil you have as to how big and how many there are, but they should be in all different types of soil that's healthy. The blue spaces, both above and below, are the water. Obviously, it's water percolating through those air spaces. So the water should pass through, it shouldn't hang out. All right, that's where we get trouble. So just, think about it a minute. Roots need oxygen and water to live, just like we do. You can think of your soil as actually having lungs. And do your lungs like being filled with water? Absolutely not. So other soil-dwelling creatures actually need that oxygen too, like worms. They're the ones that we see the most, but there's lots of other critters living in the soil. So here you can see the little worms kind of hanging out where those pores are. Next. So the next slide is showing you sort of what runoff what kind of havoc runoff can create, okay? And so note that the air pockets we saw in the last slide are now totally filled with water. Basically anything is drowned, any plant roots, any soil-dwelling organisms, worms, all the critters you see and don't see. Those air pockets disappear for good when you overwater all the time in a chronic way. So everything is drowned. There's no oxygen for soil or plant life. And these conditions are troubling because they can cause fungus and diseases. Of course, they'll kill your plants, but also your soils will become compacted and the water either goes down away from the plant roots or worse, as I've showed here in a kind of silly way, the water runs off the top. And what happens? It becomes irrigation runoff. So there you have it. Let's look at the next slide where we're back to your soil, because this is the image I want to stay in your head. This is your soil watered just right, okay? White space is air pockets, blue space is water. So just a reminder not to drown your soil herds, okay? Leave some space for water. And how are we going to do that? Let's take a look at the roots and where they are going to need the water, because that's also how you're going to protect your soil from chronic overwatering. All right. Let's take a look at your root systems. So we're going to today address trees and lawn. There are a lot of different root systems, but today the larger root systems are trees and shrubs. And here's a little known secret is that 90% of your tree roots are in the top 18 inches of soil, or if you're a metric reader, the top ½ meter of soil. Okay, so trees and shrubs have the deepest root systems, but still, that's where most of the roots are. So you're really only going to water to that area. And how are you going to do it? Deeply, infrequently. Okay, avoiding irrigation runoff, you can water right to these tree and shrub root systems. And of course, as we talked about, anything more is a waste and it will kill your worms. So use the right amount of water and cultivate some of these watering habits to help establish deeper, more resilient root systems. We will talk a little later about how to build your root systems of your plants. But for right now, let's go to the next slide where I'm going to show you what our habits can cultivate when we're talking about lawn, because lawns grow so fast, we can really see the results of our habits of watering, okay? Now we're thinking about getting water to our root systems. When we think about lawn roots, you can argue, 6-10 inches, more or less, depends on your soil, your situations, doesn't matter because they're pretty shallow. So take a look at how these root systems will respond to your watering habits. On the very left, deep and infrequent watering, you're seeing a lot of roots and you're seeing them deep and wide. In the middle, someone who's watered their lawn deeply but a lot, the roots will go down, but there's not a lot of them, not as many as if we cut back on that water frequency. And on the far right is what most of us do. It's shallow, frequent watering, creating very shallow and few roots, okay? So if 90% of all watering error is overwatering, what would be your fix? Your habit should change to deep and infrequent watering. All right, so here's another little tip. If you still have lawn and you haven't gotten around to converting your lawn, you can help your lawn through this next summer by mowing it very high, mow it less often, and add an inch of compost top dressing. We'll talk a little more about this tip later on, but that's in essence what you're going to think about. You're going to water. Next slide, please. Your 2 habits to cultivate are watering only to the root depth and water deeply and infrequently so that you can avoid irrigation runoff, okay? Gutters are for storm water. They're not for irrigation runoff. Try to remember that. And by the way, better watering habits means better root systems. You just kind of saw how that creates a much better, more healthy and resilient root system, and it also creates healthier soils, so less storm water runoff. Next, and just to hammer my point home just a little bit, only you can prevent irrigation runoff. Everyone, please note, this is a storm drain. It's not an irrigation drain, okay? We should not have water in our gutters during our dry season. Essentially, we don't really get much water falling out of the sky, but why are our gutters full? So let's suck it up. Remember, watering deeply and infrequently to your root zones creates plant resilience, prevents irrigation and stormwater runoff, and, I think about it as irrigation runoff is only for drips. Enough said. Take it away, Marcia.
So please enter your questions in the chat. Now we're going to talk about irrigation a little bit. So where are we going to start? We want to choose water efficient irrigation methods. Next slide, please. So the first picture is a fixed spray and standard spray, and that's what we usually see in a lot of lawns and yards. And you need to know that that technology is quite old. It's like 40 years old or even more, and it's not very efficient. A lot of water is thrown into the air that just gets misted and evaporated, and it delivers water faster than the soil can take it up. That leads to the dreaded runoff. So the head on the right is a rotator, a rotary spray, and that's definitely a much more efficient way to spray and more modern technology, not 2-year technology. It's been around for 20 years, but it's new to a lot of people. The choice of throw patterns in this goes from 8 to 35 feet. And there's even another efficient way. If you have a need for a bigger lawn further than 35 feet, there are stream rotors. Next slide, please. So fixed sprays on a slip lawn, how familiar is the site of that runoff? Sule showed us the storm drain. Now this is the lawn that is connected. What a waste of those drops. So the fixed spray can spray up to 3.5 inches per hour. Rotator sprinklers apply about 0.4 inches per hour, less than 1/2 inch an hour. That gives the soil more time to absorb that water. And oh yeah, remember that that water in the gutter actually flows to the river or the bay or the ocean. Those poor fish swim among all the street pollutants that's gathered in that water. Next. Whenever you throw water into the air, you're going to lose some of it. You're going to be less efficient with your use. Rotator spray heads do a more efficient job of it. They cover a very complete pattern. There are no dry spots if they're put in right. They throw out large water droplets, which fall to the ground rather than misting into the air. And they apply water slowly so the soil has a chance to absorb the water. And then it's in the soil for your plants to use. Rotators apply about, like I said, about 0.4 inches per hour. And remember, standard spray was up to almost 3.5 inches per hour. The good news is that you can change out those old-fashioned standard spray nozzles and replace them with rotator nozzles. You don't have to change the entire sprinkler body. Just unscrew the old nozzle and replace. Voila, you're done. It's really easy. Then the different style of really highly efficient irrigation is drip irrigation. It puts water right at the soil and never into the air at all. So it's the most efficient. It lies easily into flowing organic patterns like our plant layouts, like our yards. And they're flexible systems adjusting to site-specific challenges. And in the case of drip grids, it already accommodates for mature plant growth. As your plant grows, it's going to need more water. Next. So in drip irrigation, there are two types of drip irrigation. One of them is point source, the top left picture. The emitters are placed at the plants. And if you have plant groupings or plants that are wide apart, that's the drip for you. More common now in urban and suburban areas is line source for dense plantings. So basically, line source is where the entire area is going to get water. A plant, no matter where it is, in the end, the entire area will have water in it. In both of these types of drip, no matter what you've heard or what you're told or who tells you, drip is not microspray. Microsprays put out between 1 to 3 inches per hour, almost as much as big spray. Next, please. So here's a picture of some point source drip being put in. The green circles represent the plant, where the plants will go, and the drip emitters will be placed at the plants. You'll be going with solid tubing, and then it will come with no holes. It could be black or brown, but no holes in it. And then you'll be putting the drip emitters in. Roots will grow, and they'll spread into the moist soil. As the plant grows, they're going to require more water to thrive. So in the future, in point source, additional drip emitters will be needed to add for mature growth. Next, please. And here's some line source pictures, and you can see by the wetting patterns under the soil, like about 6 inches down, these patterns are meant to meet each other underground, essentially wetting the entire drip grid area. No need to add drip as the plants grow. And you're going to use solid lines between watered areas, so you can have more than one line source system in an area if you just run between those areas with a solid line. Note here for both point source and line source drip. When first planted, the plants will need at least one emitter to be over the new container-sized soil. New plants don't have spreading roots yet. Good thing to remember. So you gotta, even though you have irrigation, you have to pay attention to your new planting. Next slide, please. This setup here is a valve assembly for drip. Looks complicated? Maybe. You need something like this for a new automated drip system setup. It's designed to last a long time and through all sorts of weather. The anti-siphon valve, the black thing at the top, is necessary for any automated irrigation. See the wires? Yeah, it operates electrically. But really, even more important to notice is that any drip system needs to have some way to regulate the pressure. And it's nice to have a filter to filter out those tiny pieces of sand and dirt that can get into any outdoor pipe and clog those tiny drip emitters. Next, please. Here are some other drip components, almost like Legos, but this picture shows you some of the really necessary things. There's a couple of pressure regulators on the top left. On the top right is a big old roll of tubing. That tubing is fairly inexpensive. So don't think that because you have hundreds of feet of it running around your yard, the tubing is going to cost a lot. It does not. There are lots of options for these parts, but some of these are what the professionals use in standard residential drip systems. And just so you know, you get what you pay for in irrigation equipment. You are not saving money when buying inexpensive irrigation parts. You're going to pay later in repairs. All of us professionals have learned that the hard way. Next. And something you should know about all of this irrigation, the spray and the drip, the point source or the line source, you do not mix any of the styles I've mentioned on the same irrigation valve. Why? They all have different rates of water delivery. You cannot water effectively. You can only overwater, and Sule has told us how bad that is. No mixing. That means no fixed spray with rotators, no rotators with microspray, no rotators with drip point source, no drip point source with drip line source. I could go on, but you get the picture, I hope. Next. Well, what if you already have sprinklers and you don't want a whole new irrigation system overhaul, but you want to be more efficient? I'll show you simple ways to convert your spray irrigation to drip. Next. Here's a thirsty lawn with antiquated irrigation fittings. It can use up to 4,000 gallons a month in July in California per 1,000 square feet. That's a lot of water. Next. And here's a lovely yard by Gary Kernick of Change of Seasons Landscapes. It's such a nice place to visit. This yard uses about 800 gallons per month per 1,000 square feet, 1/5 of turf in the same area. And this yard gets extra points. It's such an interesting landscape. Surprisingly, this can even happen in a front yard. Lots of good stuff going on in here. The planting is a lot more lower water plants that provide wonderful habitat for wildlife. It features a dry creek bed, which takes the water from the roof and runs it through the rock so it can perk into the ground, and the plants can use it before it ever hits the storm drain. And note the use of mulch. Sule will talk about mulch more and why that is so great later. It just so happens that the most straightforward way to irrigate this low water wildlife habitat friendly garden is with a drip system. Next. Nowadays, many irrigation manufacturers have spray to drip retrofit kits. Makes it pretty easy. You guys can do this. There are other ways to retrofit, but these kits are really easy to understand. But just like in a new drip irrigation system, we will still need a filter and a pressure regulator. And in this retrofit kit, the filter and the pressure regulators are built right into the sprinkler bodies. Can you ignore the fact that drip might need a pressure regulator, that will need a pressure regulator and maybe a filter? Yeah, sure, you can ignore it, but don't expect your system to be trouble-free or to function correctly. Next, please. An example of one irrigation company's conversion kit, this is Rainbirds. So you convert right out of that sprinkler body, and it's a modern sprinkler body. I'm sorry, a 30-year-old body won't work for this. It's got to be something they've made in the last 5 years. But you can see that It's going to have pressure regulation right through that body. And then those barbed connectors just screw right onto that top adapter they have at the top. Then you could go right out into your drip system. Next, please. Here are some visuals on installing a drip retrofit kit. You see how simple it is. You can also see some videos about how to do it at beyondthedrought.com. And at that little site, huge site actually, there's all sorts of different water saving videos, but they do have videos on retrofitting from spray to drip. Next, please. And finally, make sure you cap your unused sprinklers, because we're not using sprinklers anymore. We're into a drip system now. Make sure you cap all those unused heads, or when you turn on your valve, you're going to have lots of surprises. And then you can congratulate yourself and start running your converted drip irrigation system. Next. Please enter your questions into the chat if you have any. Thanks. So get the most out of every drop. We want to know how long to run our irrigation. When do we run our irrigation? That is such a complicated question usually. So now we've chosen our irrigation systems to be most efficient. The most important component of our system is our irrigation controller. It turns out we need to make sure our irrigation controller tells our irrigation system to run when our yards need the water. Notice I didn't say when we feel our yards need water, but when our yards actually need water. Why not let a smart timer do the thinking for you? Next, please. Smart controllers can know when to apply water and how much. That's a key component. Just making daily adjustments can save 10 to 20%. With a little data input by you, these wise controllers know how much water the plants need, how much water your system should give, and its relation to soil infiltration. And they account for the weather. This takes the guessing out of the scheduling. Scheduling can be difficult to handle. Smart timers help to take the edge off. In the Sacramento region, you can also visit bewatersmart.info for more information. Next, please. But if you're not from this region, or if you're from this region, you can go to this nifty scheduling app for the Sacramento region. And if you're not, go to your own water provider or conservation staff to find out about a scheduler for your area. So what if you don't already have it? What if you already have an irrigation controller? And maybe it's not so smart. If you need to schedule a timer yourself, here's a handy app. This scheduling controller is at beyondthedrought.com. So you don't have to think as hard, you don't have to worry as much, and you can water with confidence. I'll take you through a quick look at this scheduler so you can see how easy it is. We press the little blue go button. Next. And we get to enter the particulars of where we live. That way the scheduler can consider whether water restrictions of our particular water agency, and that's important to know for any irrigation schedule. And remember the root depth talk? We told this scheduler what type of plants we're watering. So it takes into account the ideal root depths of the plant material. And we need to know how much sun the plant gets. That affects its water use too. Next. It asks us other things that can really affect the way a plant uses water or how soil absorbs water, like a slope, wind, what kind of soil we have. Next. Because we all have different conditions in our own yards. Next. We'll choose the irrigation type we have in our yard. You can see some of those types: fixed spray, stream rotor, even old brass heads. We're going to choose fixed spray. Of course, after you watch this presentation, you'll want to change that. We learned that fixed spray puts out water pretty quickly, so that's going to affect our schedule. We press the little blue go, and like magic, it spits out the ideal schedule. for the hot months of the year. The yard requires different amounts of water even within these 5 months. Note the cycles per day column. That is what is sometimes referred to as cycle and soak, where you run the irrigation to runoff for, in this case, it's in July, it's 4 minutes. But you notice, hey, the scheduler says the lawn needs water for 12 minutes that day, and it only said 4 minutes. So it needs 48 minutes per week in July, 4 days per week. Well, the lawn can't take in, and that soil can't absorb more than 4 minutes of water. So we have to run it 3 times in that same day. That is what cycle and soak means. When you cycle and soak, you get the water to soak down further in the soil to the proper root depth and no more. Next. And without the cycle and soak, we get that shuddering runoff that even the fishies have issues with. Next. You guys have any questions about all of this stuff? Please enter them into the chat and we'll try to address them during the presentation or at the end. Thanks. So we talked about how to make your irrigation more efficient. Are there other tips? Well, Sule is going to show you how to have a whole new attitude about dirty fingernails. Sule? Next.
Thank you, Marcia. I won't take that personally, even though I do have dirty fingernails right now from my weeding. All right, so the soil, my favorite. I did promise you a couple of more lazy habits to cultivate a better landscape. And let's have the next slide. Very good. All right, so our next tip in general is to nurture your soil. And I'm going to give you 2 ways to do that. Next. So remember how I talked earlier about watering only to the depth of your roots? What if you could improve or maybe even build your root health, your soil health, and also save water, save maintenance, save time, save money? I have 2 ideas for the lazy gardener. One of them is compost, and number 2 is mulch. It's so simple, not super expensive, and just a little addition to how you maintain your landscape. The next slide is here to remind us that the secret to a lovely and resilient landscape lies in the soil. There's no way to get around this, all right? There's no chemicals, no fancy gimmicky products. There's no shortcuts. It's very simple and straightforward. But there are a couple of inexpensive, easy habits that you can cultivate. And here they are, next slide. Lazy gardener strategy number 1. Compost is your friend and your valuable ally. You can think of compost as a soil nutrient. It's like a slow food or a drip feed, all right? Root systems will thrive in composted soils. And over time, if you keep regularly adding an inch of compost to your lawn, to your planting beds, all over your root systems on top of those, your soils will become like nutrient-rich sponges. And those soils support healthy root growth. And they just become very resilient, and they are actually very nutritious as well. So 1 inch of compost beneath the plants for long-term soil health. That's all you really need. Next. We also know that using compost as a key ingredient to creating soil structure and soil health saves you water. It saves you time. It saves you money. It's a very pro-planet healthy habit to cultivate. So add an inch of compost before you mulch, and please do not skip this step. It's tempting to just gloss over it, but when you're going to mulch, order the compost as well. Next. So lazy gardener tip number 2. I don't know why I always get the lazy gardener tips, I guess because I am one. But people ask, well, why should I mulch? What can mulch do for me? What can it do for my soil? Well, the lazy gardener kind of learns as you go along that mulch is a pre-compost. Mulch tops your compost. It holds the compost in place. Compost is tiny and broken up nutrients in the soil, and they tend to blow, and you tend to eat it and get it in your eyes and your nose. But if you top your compost with mulch, they kind of work together as a blanket that cools and protects the soil. Mulch itself protects the soil from weathering. It insulates the plant roots from weather extremes, wind, rain, pelting rain, beating heat, all of that kind. So mulch is the very best kind of soil practice to cultivate. All right, it's going to break down and become your soil eventually. As we see in the next slide, we are going to talk briefly about, what is mulch? Mulch is a magical thing that you can do to your landscape, but you have to think about what is the right mulch. And the very best, most popular mulches work the best as well. So wood chips, we particularly love the arborist mulch. We see the best results with it, even though it is free. That's a little tip for you. It's generally the best mulch is bark, and you could also do dried grass clippings, but mulches are the easiest and most effective ways to manage weeds. Okay, mulches will help control weeds by limiting the light to the seed, which is what is required for weed establishment. Mulches will help conserve the water. It'll hold it in the soil. It helps prevent erosion from wind and rain, pelting rain and moving water. And they are aesthetically pleasing when you maintain them properly, okay? So the most common mulches you'll see here, you should probably mulch about 4 inches, give or take. Some people say 6, some say 3, but right around in there, 4 inches is a nice even number, and you should refresh that at least every year to prevent weed invasions. Next slide. So some mistakes that we see out in the field, we see them all the time. We just want to speak to them. We have, as landscape designers, the 3 of us are pretty opinionated. We do not like landscape fabrics. We do not like weed barriers. We do not recommend plastics. And rocks and gravels are very hot, and they do not break down and become soil nutrients. They just basically will heat up the soil and the plant roots. And of course, rubber would not be something that we would recommend. But if you do have problems with weeds, additional weed control can be enhanced by underneath your mulch. You would try using layers of cardboard. You can do them 2 different directions, one layer one direction and another over the top like a weave and going in another direction. Some people even use painter's paper, topped with compost, and then finally that 4 inches of mulch for you. So remember, rubber, plastics, gravel, rock will not cool your soil. These things don't break down to become nutrients for your soil or your plant roots to use, and they won't improve the root systems, and they will certainly not help with water retention. Because we're all about efficiency, we really would like to use those natural mulches. So, next slide. In order to prepare for summer, we gave you 2 easy soil strategies to go with your 2 new and improved watering habits. We said that you can boost your soil nutrients and water holding capacity with compost, and then topping that with 4 inches of mulch. And those soil habits work great when you pair them to watering only to your root depth and watering deeply and infrequently. Next.
So we showed you some. Let's check the chat for questions.
So our recap looks like this. We gave you some ideas for how to prepare your garden for summer with 2 easy habits for watering. You're going to water to your plant roots, water deeply and infrequently. And Marcia gave you some ideas here. Marcia?
You're going to start with efficient irrigation, efficient sprays, or you're even going to put in new drip. You can also convert your old irrigation to some kind of water saving style, like a point source or a line source drip. You can use a smart controller or the smart irrigation scheduler to run your irrigation.
And finally, you can enlist your soil to help protect your garden through the heat by adding an inch of compost topped with 4 inches of mulch. And that's your spring into summer. So let's check the chat.
Great, thank you very much. And before we do that, I have one more poll question. So if you have other questions, please enter them into the chat. But let's do one more poll question here. All right, here we go. So the question is, when do you plan to change your water efficient sprinklers and or drip emitter irrigation to water efficient sprinklers and or drip emitter irrigation? So that's great. The answers are coming in. The answers from which you can choose is in 1 month, you're going to make a change, in 2 to 6 months, in 1 year, may not change my system, or bravo, I've already made my irrigation system water efficient. So that's great. Thank you all for entering those in. I am going to go ahead and end this poll and show everybody the results. So at 27% in 1 month and 27% in 2 to 6 months. In 1 year, 9%, may not change my system. And then I've already made my irrigation system water efficient, 21%. That is just great.
That's wonderful.
So I'm going to go ahead and stop that share and let's get to these questions because I have quite a few, which is great. So first of all, we had one that said, here we go. Can you put the mulch over the drip system or does it clog it up? And we have a lot of questions, so let's go.
So I'll address that question. I was just in a yard yesterday where the landscaper had buried the drip irrigation in the soil. That is a really not a good thing to do because later, like a year later, you go to find that drip line because you don't want to cut through it with your shovel. You can't find it. It's under the soil. So what you do is you lay the drip right on top of the soil and you cover it with mulch and know the mulch will not clog the drip emitters. Like I said, the more you spend on them, the better they function. So,
great. Okay. How do you get those hoses connected in circles and branches like that, like you were showing on the slides?
It's just like the little toys that your kids play with. They make T's and elbows and yeah, they're pretty interesting to put together. And the hose is very flexible. So it goes around curves really easily. You use a lot of T's.
And I'll just add to that, there are landscape staples that will connect, that you'll use to just pin that to the soil so that the emitters can be right next to the soil. That's what you really want. You don't want them popping up off the soil. Right, Marcia?
Yeah, it's like a U-shaped metal pin.
If you use those, they're usually called jute stakes. If you use those stakes, a lot of them, mm-hmm. It becomes a stationary system. It doesn't move around, which is what most people complain about with drip systems. You peg it to the ground really well, and then it's fairly trouble-free.
Okay, great. So why haven't you mentioned soaker hoses at all?
Well, soaker hoses are not saying, they have no science. They're just little holes. And yes, they do clog and they emit varying amounts of water. So that's why I say they're not scientific. So an inline tube with emitters built right in it, it functions just like a soaker hose, but it has all sorts of wonderful capabilities that you don't even realize these things have.
Okay. How do you do drip irrigation for container plants?
That's a good use for the little soaker hoses.
Well, I mean, what I've done with container plants is I'll take the A tube up through the bottom of the container, and then I'll circle the plant with some of that tubing that has the emitters built right into it. and, I'll pin it down to the soil, just like you all were saying a second ago. And then I will have all my container plants on one zone or one valve so that they can get the water that they need. Anything else to add to that?
That's really important. Containers are on their own line. Don't mix them with plants in the soil, no matter what kind of irrigation you use on them.
Yeah, and that's because they're in a finite space. They only have so much soil. And sometimes if the container is in the sun, the soil can dry out much faster. So here's kind of a two-part question. Do you know of a source for drip irrigation design tool or software? Once plants are established, I like to just water by hand when needed. Is this a good option? Actually, there's three questions then. Do you want to answer those two? And then I've got another one.
So Cheryl, you might be a great one for the source. I don't know that I have anywhere to direct people.
So the source of the design tool, well, there's one that I like to use that's quite intuitive and relatively easy, but as a professional, it does the job for me. And it's called Pro Contractor. And they have a design studio, and there's irrigation as well as landscape design. And it's like $35 a month. And if you can use it for 30 days, and if you don't want to use it anymore, you don't have to renew it. But also go on to some of the manufacturers' websites, Rainbird, Hunter, and Netafim, for example. They all have some really handy design tools for you. So once the plants are established, yes, I think that's good about watering by hand. But this person just rebuilt a wildfire. I just rebuilt a wildfire rebuild in the Santa Rosa area. Mulch easily burns. It scares me how much mulch is being used in my neighborhood. What are good options to use instead of mulch?
Compost. You're going to have weed. The mulch helps keep down weeds too. But you can put compost down. It doesn't, the chunks don't blow around, which is the fear about mulch becoming flying embers and really high winds.
And another good point would be, you've got your mulch. Mulch, as Marcia and Soleil were saying, so many benefits. What you can do and what the rule of thumb is right now, and understand that there's more and more research being done, but this is pretty fresh research that, within about, 3 to 5 feet, people are saying, of your home, don't have anything combustible and don't have mulch right up next to your house. So that's a relatively small area, but I would say there's still many benefits to mulch. So, just keep that in mind. And also, if your landscape is well cared for and watered and the plants are hydrated the way that they need to be, less risk. But there's more webinars out there about that. And I know California American Water had one, I think it was a couple of weeks ago. So Karen might be able to speak to that if it was recorded. Okay, I know it's best to water in the early morning or evening or at night. Do these timers take that into consideration or into account?
Usually you can put in when you don't want them to water. Yes, they're pretty savvy, these timers. They're great,
Yeah, you can enter in different watering windows, so to speak. And you can say, like you're saying, days that you don't want it to be watered. And if it's a smart timer that is tying in and basing a schedule, you might have entered a schedule into your controller, then the smart controller is taking over. It will adjust the schedule and so forth. And you can enter in any parameters that you want. So that's a good question. Where do you get this free mulch?
Tree companies. Some municipalities have a nonprofit sites, but my clients are never successful. Basically, tree companies, when you see someone's tree coming down from down the street, go talk to them and say, hey, can I have your chips? Just so you guys know, arborist chips have been scientifically proven to be the best mulch for your soil. And it doesn't matter if the tree had a disease or has pests. Once it goes through the chipper, it's all good. You can use all that stuff.
And it's all
Right from the
different
arborist
sizes,
mouth.
so it breaks down. I'm sorry, Soleil, go ahead.
Yeah, the
Oh.
arborist mulch.
Yeah, right from the arborist mouth. I was just going to add that in some areas there is an online app called chipdrop.com where people are having success in accessing arborist mulches. There, it depends on who answers and how you bargain for it. It's little cost to no cost. There are varying degrees of success, and you have to be, kind of learn about it and figure out where they can drop things. So give
Good.
that a shot. Chipdrop.com.
Thank you, Soleil. Okay, we've got a few more questions and just a few more minutes. Is weed cloth necessary under the mulch? And I think you pretty much answered that about plastics and weed cloth and so forth, right? Is there anything else to add?
We do not like weed cloth and landscape fabrics, whatever you would like to call them, because we note over and over again that weed seeds will just sit on top of those, and as the mulch will decay and try and become soil nutrients, the mulch can't get to the soil, and it can't. The weed seeds just sit on top and they'll sprout. They'll sprout right on top of those. So that's why we recommend giving a shot to cardboard or landscape or painter's paper instead.
And the landscape fabric just becomes debris that you have to deal with later. It's just a eyesore in a yard, and it's doesn't decay, it goes to the landfill. Can cost you a lot of money. If you have your whole property landscape fabric, to pull that up and get rid of it is expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. What are the most optimal times of the day for watering 3 times? So it's that cycle and soak you were talking about, right?
Mm-hmm. It sort of depends on the type of soil that you enter into the schedulers. If it's really tight soil, it might be a bigger breathing period for it. You might need more than like an hour, but usually it's like on 1 hour, off 1 hour. If it's heavy clay, it might be a little bit longer. But often if you're spraying water, you want to do it in the morning so that lawn has a chance to dry off quickly. You don't want
less likelihood of winds and so forth to move that water where it's not intended to be, right?
Yeah.
So this person has begun switching to new sprinkler technologies. That's great. Another comment is thank you for the great suggestions and ideas. Very helpful. Is there anything that can be done about neighbors who absolutely do not care about wastewater or wasting water? That might be something that Karen might want to speak to. And it's also bringing your neighbors together, and talking about it. But Karen, do you have any suggestions?
I think that's a great question. Each water agency in every district throughout the state has a conservation staff or a water efficiency staff. And we each have different water sources, so it will determine how we approach that customer. But we do have programs. Please contact me directly or your own water provider, and we can discuss how we can help that person reduce that water waste and hopefully eliminate it. So I'll put my information in the chat.
Great, thank you. And we do have a webinar. So for the person and perhaps others who are asking about, the hazards of mulch, Karen said that there is a firescape. The webinar is available at AmericanWater.com. Also, SMUD has a yard where you can pick up free mulch, and some other towns or cities do too as well. So that looks like, one question came in. Is it better to use tree bark as mulch with all its nutrients rather than the other part of the tree? You want to answer that real quickly, and then we'll just close up here.
Sure. The arborist mulch, the entire tree, it's sort of like marinara sauce. The more you put in it, a lot of times the better it tastes. The entire tree is better than just the bark for improving soil.
Great. So we just want to remind people that you will receive a link with the information of how you can find this recording on the California American website. And I'd like to ask Karen if you have anything else to add before we say goodbye to people.
Why, thank you. I want to say what a great presentation. Lots of great information, how to save water, get the most out of every drop. We keep life flowing through water. So I encourage everybody to go to the water agency that services your area. If you are a California American Water customer, come to our website or contact us personally. And again, our website is americanwater.com, or you can reach me directly. If you're not sure how to get to your own water provider, maybe I can assist you further. I'll be happy to help. Our programs are listed on the website. Our conservation staff is passionate in every district, and we're here to serve you. So keep on going with your tools in the garden, water efficiency education programs. They're here for you. They're free. And I just want to thank the panelists again for such a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Souley and Marcia. That was really a great presentation, very informative. People ask me, why do I attend these also? And I'm like, I learned something every single time I hear another presentation. So thank you all for joining us, and please take care. And we will now end this webinar, and I will stop the recording. Thank you.
Oops.